Several months ago, I made a video, posted a video on YouTube called "Can I Make a Teton Range Cutting Board?" And this was the board that I made. And as you can see, it doesn't really look like the mountain range. Maybe waves, sand dunes at best. But regardless, that video has been viewed now 569 times, at least at the time of this filming, which I don't know how it didn't make YouTube's 2021 top 10. But regardless, I decided that people want more, so I'm going to give it to you. I set out using a different approach. Going to do a second attempt at this. So that's what I'm going to show you here, and I'm going to show you why I kind of failed. Enjoy. So I'm going to kind of gloss over the first part of this process because more than likely you've watched other videos on making cutting boards, so you understand kind of the general basics. But the first few steps are to take my boards and cut some 1.5-inch strips out of them. And then once that's done, I can glue those up as two separate boards, one with the maple and one with the red oak. And then once I've got my two halves of the cutting board done, I can take them over to the planer and get those planed down to a matching thickness. And I used the red oak half of the board for the mountain range. And rather than creating some elaborate stencil, I decided to just freehand draw out the mountain range. So I pulled up a picture on my iPad and just kind of, like I said, did it by hand. And I think it turned out pretty well, at least that portion of the project. It may not be exactly perfect to the Teton Range, but it's pretty close and good enough for what I'm trying to do here. So with the range now drawn on that red oak board, I can go ahead and start cutting that out. And I decided to go with the scroll saw this time as opposed to the bandsaw. And that may have been my undoing or my bad decision on my part. I don't know if that kind of created some of the issues that I ran into that you'll see later in the project. But regardless, that was the path I took. So took that over to the scroll saw, went ahead and cut that out. So with the Teton Range now cut out from the bottom half of the board, I can then take that and simply overlay that on the upper half of the maple half and just trace over the cut that I made for the range so that I'll have the cut for the second half of the board, which will just be the sky. And then once I'm done with that, I can take the maple half over to the scroll saw and cut out the mirror image of the bottom half of the board. And it, as you'll see, it turned out to not exactly be a mirror image, but we'll get to that in just a minute. And now each of my halves are cut, and it's time to go ahead and glue these two pieces together. And you'll see I'm having to put some painter's tape on the back of one of the boards so that the glue during the glue up doesn't drip all over the place. And the reason that there's dripping glue is because of the relatively large gaps that were created between these two boards, which you'll see here with the kind of close-up view. And that's really where the issues with this board came together. Again, I don't know if it was the use of the scroll saw that caused that, maybe some bending of the blade, or maybe it was just bad cuts on my part. I don't know. But regardless, when these two boards came together, they were far from perfect. So as imperfect as it may be, I decided to continue along and try and salvage the project. So to fill some of those massive gaps between the two halves, I mixed up some wood glue with sawdust and just started kind of filling in those gaps, which made a pretty big mess, I'll be the first to admit, but I really wasn't sure of any other way to get around that. So this is me filling in the gaps. And once the glue had dried, now it was time to try and actually clean up the mess that I had made. And I started with just my orbital sander and realized that was going to take too long, and so I decided to bring out the hand plane, thinking I could just kind of take off a little bit more, a little bit quicker. And I think it kind of worked, but eventually I did have to go back to the orbital sander to try and finish that up. So as you can see, once everything was cleaned, it did what I wanted it to. It filled the gaps, but at the same time, those gaps aren't exactly the look I was going for. I really wanted this board, or these two boards, to meet perfectly, which they certainly did not, and that's really the big reason why I consider this a fail. But at the end of the day, I salvaged, I think, enough to say that this was at least a usable cutting board. So now that the gluing and the sanding is all done, I can start working on kind of the finishing touches. So I set up my little mini portable router table and give the top edge a rounded finish, and decided to try something a little bit different for the bottom part, adding a fairly substantial beveled edge just to make the cutting board a little bit easier to manage, easier to pick up off of the counter, which I'd never used this in the past, so I wasn't really sure how it was going to turn out, but I kind of liked it, and it certainly did what I wanted it to. And then the last couple of steps is to first wet the board down, raise the grain, and give it one final sanding for a nice smooth finish, and then just apply the mineral oil. So there you have it. There's round 2 of the Can I Make a Teton Range cutting board. So final thoughts. Is it a cutting board? Yes. Does it look more like the Teton Range? Yeah, I think so. But can I call it a success? I don't really think so. I mean, some of these gaps are 1/8 of an inch, maybe bigger, and just wasn't really the look I was going for. So anyway, I think that's probably it for me. I don't see a round 3 in my future. So let me know, which one do you like? Round 2? Round 1? Thanks for watching.